Hi, I'm Monsignor Jim Lisante. This week on Personally Speaking, our guest is Patti Davis. She is, of course, the daughter of President Ronald Reagan and his wife, Nancy. She has a powerful new book called Dear Mom and Dad. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and author Patti Davis joins me now. Patti is the daughter and child of Ronald and Nancy Reagan. She has written a number of books, including The Long Goodbye, which dealt with the former president's battle with Alzheimer's disease. Patti's latest book is called Dear Mom and Dad. The subtitle is A Letter About Family, Memory, and the America We Once Knew. The book takes the form of a moving written letter to her parents and examines the private reality behind the couple's public image that only she knew as their daughter. In Dear Mom and Dad, Patti Davis provides a later life look and reconsideration of her parents' lives as people who were shaped by their own early lives. Patti's here with us to talk today about her life, her family, her faith, and her latest book, and how she came to better understand her parents. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Patti Davis. The book we're talking about is called Dear Mom and Dad, and Patti Davis has written a beautiful memoir about her mom and dad. And let me just start by saying, for all our listeners and viewers, a very, very inviting read, something I couldn't put down, which I do not say often about the books written by our guests,
Oh,
but
good.
it really was interesting. And I just wondered, at what point in your life, Patti, did you realize that while you came from two people who obviously were into media and communications, but that you had the particular gift to communicate in a very, very effective way? When did you know that about yourself?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I still have that confidence. I have some of it, but I have my insecurities. But I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, that's from the time I was a child. That's just all I wanted to do. And I told a story in this book about when my mother used to pick me up at school, and I'd be in the corner of the playground, and not playing with other kids, but reading a book. I mean, I was just lost in stories, and it's just all I wanted to do.
Yeah, and you do it so well, Patti. It's
Well,
a
thank
gift.
you.
It's obviously a gift you developed, but it's also a natural gift. You write.
Well, I've definitely, like most writers, gotten better
Yeah,
over time. I mean, there are very few writers who would say, "Oh, go read the first book I ever wrote." I mean, maybe Truman Capote would have,
yeah,
but
yeah.
most people go, "Do not read my first book."
There was a Australian writer named Ray Kerrison, and I said to Ray, the first book I ever read was your Bishop Walsh and Maryknoll, and he said, please burn it. he said I was
Yep.
24 when I wrote that, and I never want that to be seen again. But actually, I thought he wrote a good book. Now, last week Charles Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, was our guest, and he has a book about the regret of going through an all boys boarding school where terrible abuse took place. I mention that because his book is filled with regret about never sharing some of the horrors that he went through. Some reviewers have, being conscious of your book, Dear Mom and Dad, call it a book filled with regret. But I wanted to ask you, regret, is it an emotion that is always a negative, or is it very often something that leads us to the more positive? Is regret a good or bad emotion in your mind, Patti?
I, I don't think that's a simple question to answer. I think if you get locked inside of regrets and you don't look at it as a passage, that's not a good thing. If you get locked anywhere and don't look at it as a passage, that's not a good thing. Um, I mean, I think I mean, listen, if someone who has no regrets is suddenly I'm remembering, didn't Donald Trump once say he has no regrets about
Yeah,
anything?
yeah, yes, he
We're not
did.
going to talk about him, but that
No, no,
just
no.
surfaced in my I mean, if someone said to me, I have no regrets about anything, I would go, okay, that's nice meeting you. Goodbye. And I would want to leave.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not healthy.
We don't
Um,
come into the world perfect.
so I think it's something to learn from. I also think most of us, certainly I, I'm harder on myself than I am on other people.
Mm,
I mean, some of the regrets I have, well, I wish I'd learned this earlier. I wish I'd figured this out earlier. I wish I'd done it differently earlier, you know. Um, if somebody said that to me, and people have when I ran my support group, you know, my question is always, well, did you know any better at the time? I
yeah.
mean, could you have done it differently? To which the answer is usually no. Then, you know, there's that great Maya Angelou quote, when you don't know any better, do the best you can. When you
Right.
know better, do better, right? We only know what we know, and some people are more evolved at a younger age than other people.
Patti
It's
Davis is our
do the
guest.
best you can.
Dear Mom and Dad is the name of the book. You know what I love about the book too is, and I discovered this with my parents, I guess, midway through our time together, but I don't know why we expect parents to have all the answers or do parenting right. They are always going to be a reflection of their own family of origin. And
Exactly.
Patti Davis in her book beautifully gets into coming to terms with understanding where Ron Reagan was coming from, where Nancy Davis was coming from, and why they became the people they are. Can you
Right.
share with our listeners and viewers, what did you learn about them?
Well, you know, I knew some of the facts, but I didn't, I mean, I knew that my father was a child of an alcoholic. I knew that my mother had been left by her mother, dumped really
Mm,
with her cousins at 3 years old and left there until she was 9. At which point her mother returned and said, "Oh, I was on a cruise, and which I don't know how she could have afforded to go on a cruise. She was a working actress, and which is why she dumped my mother because she needed to go work on her acting career. She was a traveling stage actress. Somehow she got on a cruise, met a doctor who, by the way, was married at the time, and um,
wow.
and then came back and fetched her at 9 years old and said, "Oh, I met this doctor, and we're going to get married, and now we're moving to Chicago." You know, so she had all of this upheaval
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I don't think probably a really loving environment. I don't know, but I'm just kind of
Hmm.
interpreting some things in those 6 years. Anyway, I knew the basic facts, but I didn't take a step back and go, okay, this is what these two human beings brought to the task of parenting. You know, we tend to think when we're younger that our parents' lives just began when they became our parents, right?
Yeah.
They had histories that they brought to this task. And, you know, obviously my parents' generation didn't really believe in therapy and didn't really believe in looking to, I mean, certainly my parents didn't. It was like, you know, the unexamined lives, you know, well, we're just not going to look at that. Right. But the fact is that those things shape them. Those things influenced how they. Where would my father have learned to be an emotionally available father? His father was an alcoholic.
Hmm.
You know, where would my mother have learned to be a nurturing mother? She was dumped with her cousins at 3, and her mother was not exactly a nurturing person. So where would she have learned that? But it took me a while, like I said, to have that distance to make
Hmm.
that connection. It's not like I just suddenly discovered their pasts. I just was willing to look past my own wounds, my own victimization, all of that, my own personal experiences, which I think is really what it takes. You go, okay, you know, I've done the victim thing, I've been done the wounded girl thing. Let me put that aside and look through a broader lens at this whole dynamic. That's really what this book is about.
Patti Davis, in her book, Dear Mom and Dad, also gets into something that hit home for a lot of us in the church, in that we've come to terms over the past 30 years with all the hidden abuses that have come to light and all the damage done, lifelong damage to people because they were inappropriately touched. And Patty gets into the inappropriateness of her grandmother's relationship with her. Uh, in the book, you're writing to mom and dad, and you're saying, "Mom, you know, you might not have believed this back then, but this is what happened." I mention that because was there ever an opening where you might have said to mom, Listen, to better understand me, you have to understand the dynamic of my relationship with your mother and how it corrupted some pretty special times in my life. Was there ever a time when you came close to being able to share what so many young people bury because of being not believed or being
Yeah.
ashamed or thinking they'll get in trouble? Did you go through a process of saying, maybe I can share with mom?
Never.
Never.
I never, ever would have said something to her.
Wow.
Ever. I mean, she would have, I don't know, she would have like called up a hitman and taken out or something. It would have been, it would not have been good. I mean, she would have called me a lot. It would have been just like nuclear war, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is when I was writing about, and this is the first time I've ever really told anyone about it. I mean, I never told when I've been in therapy, I never told a therapist about it. I never told, when I was married, I didn't tell my husband. I've never told people I've been in a relationship with. I've never told anybody. My parents are gone now. I'm writing this book, and I thought, you know what? It's time to, and for all the reasons that you mentioned, it's embarrassing, it's shameful. Plus, I never would have said anything while my mother was still alive. Um, but it was in the process of writing this that I thought, okay, her mother, Edith Davis, came back and fetched her at 9 years old. That's right at the beginning of, that's getting into puberty. Um, it's hard for me to believe that I'm the only one whose breasts she grabbed and who she
Hmm.
touched inappropriately. So I think there's a very good chance she did the same thing to my mother, which my mother would completely have blocked out
Right. Right.
and redacted and denied and all of that.
Patti Davis in her book also talks about the fact it's funny you said that your mother would have gone nuclear because there's great writing in there about Patti's anti-nuclear activities and the wonderful work she did in reminding the world about the danger of nuclear weapons. I mention that because another humble thing that you do in the book that I love because I think it goes to a problem we all have with taking on our parents when they have a different point of view as you say, looking back, instead of leading a demonstration of thousands of people against nuclear weapons, maybe I might have accomplished more by just sitting down with dad and trying to reason with him without going public. Do you have any insights for us who disagree occasionally with our parents on what's the best and worst way to try to bring them to see the point of view we have?
Well, I think um, if I could do it over again, it's not that I wouldn't go public because I did have a spotlight on me and I believed very strongly in that. And I just would have gone public differently. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have gone to demonstrations. I wouldn't have been as strident as I was. I would have maybe done interviews about it, written op-eds or something like that. I would have
Right.
made my voice heard because I. had a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the determining factor is how we do things. If we approach someone as, listen, I really want to listen to what you have to say, but I'd like you to listen to me too. Can we
Wow.
try that?
Yeah.
That's a much more productive way of approaching another person than, well, you're just wrong, you're just, I mean, I just disagree and you're wrong. And I don't even understand why you think that.
Yeah.
Um, so, or rolling our eyes and making it clear that we're really not listening, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And listen, it doesn't always work, but I think on some level that other person senses that we are attempting to have some kind of open road there. And I think if you approach the other person with curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
like, well, why do you have this opinion? Why do you feel like this? What's behind that? People are deeper than their opinions.
Yeah. Right.
Those
Right.
opinions came from something. They didn't just
Yeah.
spring full blown out of the head of Zeus. They came from something. So, I think it's just a more gentle way of approaching that rather
Mm-hmm.
than here we are, we're going to confront each other.
Yeah. You talk in the book, Patti Davis is our guest, Dear Mom and Dad is the book. You talk about even dad's whole strong anti-communism inclination. Where did that come from? And And I'm thinking it would have been an interesting thing. I heard him speak back in 1976 at an anti-communism thing. Like, where does it come from in him to believe that this thing is so inherently dangerous that we can't even allow communists to speak or have a public role in America? But there was another thing in the book I wanted to ask you about, Patty. It's not just this book for our listeners and viewers about Patty's relationship with mom and dad and their relationship with each other, but it also gets into time and time again the sometimes unproductive relationship between two brothers and two sisters. And I mention that because for me, a striking part of the book was when your dad is shot, and you meet in the airport with siblings, and you and Maureen don't even say hello to each other,
Yeah.
and or when you say with the Secret Service among themselves saying, these kids don't seem to stay in a lot of touch with each other. Why, if how do I put this nicely? Why, if we had a common difficulty with mom and dad because they weren't the best parents to anyone, why doesn't that bond the children to be even more inclined to communicate?
Well, I think my mother, I mean, I have to be honest in my answer. My mother did a very good job of fracturing this family,
Mm,
and I think it was from her insecurity, and it was like, if I keep everybody apart, then it gives her more power, sort of more control. I mean, that's sort of my armchair analysis of that. But she
yeah,
did a very good job of keeping Michael and Maureen, it was, as I wrote about in here, it was emphasized to me they were my half siblings,
right,
right?
right,
With the
yeah,
emphasis on half.
right.
I mean, I didn't use that if I referred to them in any way, but it got in there, it made an impact.
As
So,
as yeah, go ahead.
I think if that's done in a family, particularly early on, I've I used in the book the biblical reference of building a house on sand
Right.
versus building a house on stone. And if you build a house on sand, the Bible says the winds come, the storms come, and the house will fall, and mighty is the fall. So, you try years later to build these relationships, but you're building a house on sand. Families are built from the foundation up, and if there's no foundation there, what are you building on?
Yeah. We're both being armchair, but my point of view would have been if I'm mom or dad, we're going to be busy with our public careers, but wouldn't it be great if the four children at least had each other to mutually support one another? You just mentioned the Bible, so for this priest, it's a natural segue. When you were growing up, what was the faith journey like? And in so many of your writings, not just this book, it's so clear that the deeply spiritual is in you, Patty. So
Mhm.
where were you and where have you come to?
Well, I was raised going to the Presbyterian church,
Hmm.
going, starting at Sunday school
Right.
um, and then attending services as I got older. But my faith sort of became an amalgam of Eastern influences, the idea of karma and past lives and things like that. So I think that my faith is sort of a combination of all of
Hmm.
that.
Okay.
But as I wrote in this book, Jesus was a pivotal figure for me from an early age, to the point that I think because my father talked about him a lot,
Mm,
and my father would say things like, when the world is really on the brink of disaster, that's when Jesus is going to come back. And I got it. And by the way, if that's true, I think he's late. But anyway, that's just an aside.
right.
Like, where are
Yeah.
you? But I got it in my head that when he came back, he was going to come back to be my boyfriend. And
Mm,
my father was very nice about it. He said, "Well, he's going to be very busy, He's got a world to save." So he didn't discourage me, but he just pointed out that I might not be, he might not have time for me. But I had recurrent dreams about Jesus for a while. I had them several times about walking on a moon. I can still picture it. I still try to muster up that dream sometimes as I'm falling asleep. I've never had it again. But as a child, I did. I was walking on a moonlit beach at night all by myself, and Jesus was walking toward me. And we sat down on the sand and talked. I think I did most of the talking. I told him about my grandmother and, other things that I was
Wow.
feeling. And then we got up and he walked away and I walked away.
Wow. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
encounter. Yeah. And he likes to listen, I hear. So I'm glad he listened to you,
Yeah.
Patty. That's
I think I chattered a lot in my dream.
you know, one of the things that you say in the book is Dear Mom and Dad, this is Patti Davis we're talking to. One of the things you say that saddened me because I know it's true and for people who go into politics, but you talked about the day your dad's elected and you said politics, my enemy, because of the way in which it would come between you and your dad. We had on not too long ago the now out of politics former Vice President Mike Pence, and he's written a book called Go Home for Dinner. And his basic point of view was I never wanted to be caught up in being pulled from my family by anything political. So family was everything as it had to be. But you sound from in the book like politics can be the enemy of family life and can be the enemy of building family. Do you think it's possible, Patty, to get into public life and still have what we would call a normal or healthy family life?
Sure. I mean, I think the Obamas have demonstrated that. And, I think politics was one element that pulled us apart.
Mm,
But to be honest, I think if my parents were the people that they were, no matter what the occupation was of my family, I think the dynamic would still have been the same because, like we were talking about, they brought their personal histories
mhm.
to parenting, right? So, politics was one more wedge in there. And certainly in terms of my father, I thought, well, politics is taking him away. America is taking him away. And as I've said, numerous times, I had this sibling rivalry with America. But the truth of the matter is, my father was a very elusive man. I mean, he had that reserve, he had that distance, which is very typical of children of alcoholic. It's a self-protective thing.
You say in another place that your dad said to you, basically, it's a thing I've always believed that, God has a plan for every one of us and nobody's here by accident. At this point
Mhm.
in your life, because we're not kids anymore, we're not ancient, but we're not kids. Have you figured out this is the reason God made Patti Davis? This is what God had in mind. I found the path. I know what I'm supposed to do. I get it. I know why I'm here.
I think I still ask the question. I think it's good to always ask the question. I mean, certainly the work that I've done with Alzheimer's,
Mm.
in light of my father's illness, that absolutely, I think that I was supposed to do that. Creating and starting a support group, which I ran for 6 years. And the writing that I've done on Alzheimer's and the ways in which I still, even though I'm not actually running my support group anymore, a friend just texted me today and said, I need to call you later. I think my stepmother has dementia. I need to ask you some questions. So, um, I have informed myself about the disease and have set myself on a course to try to help other people, other caregivers. So that definitely I think is, and also I think as a writer, communicating with people um, and hopefully touching them in whatever ways I can, I think is a reason that I'm here. But like I said, I still ask that. I think it's an important question to ask all the time.
Patty Davis is our guest. I hope our listeners and viewers will get the book, Dear Mom and Dad, because it's so good. But I promised my last question. One of the
Hmm.
first interviews I did long, long, long time ago, and he was a fan of your dad's, was with the iconic film director Frank Capra. And of course, probably his most famous film is It's a Wonderful Life. At the beginning, in the discussion between St. Joseph and St. Peter, they talk about George Bailey and what's wrong with him? Is he sick? And St. Peter says, no, much worse than sick. He's discouraged. I mentioned discouragement because I wonder, in light of everything you've written about, not just in Dear Mom and Dad, but in everything you've written, uh, Patty, you've been battered along the way, and I just wondered when you have been, are you still a person of hope, and do you believe that you're not consumed by discouragement, but you see the possibility for for great things to happen in your life and in the world?
I think that sort of refers to your previous question of what we were talking about why you're here. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I think we all get discouraged, we all get hurt, we all feel beaten down at times. But what do you do with that? You know, do you just sit there and wallow in that? Or I used to say to people in my support group who would say, well, I'm so angry, or I'm so, or, so upset, or I'd say, you know what, you need to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
But then you have to say, is this where I want to live?
Right.
Do you want to
Right.
live in that anger? Do you want to live in that pain? So it's not about gutting into denial, or, as Marianne Williamson says, pouring pink paint over something. It's
Mhm.
not that. It's not like, oh, everything's fine. you
Right,
know,
right, right.
that's in the category of someone saying they have no regrets. If someone says, oh, no, nothing's wrong, everything's fine,
Yeah.
everything's not always fine, and you need to feel that. But then you need to go, okay, then what's the way through this? And more importantly, what can I learn from this?
Mm.
Right? What can I learn from my discouragement? What can I learn by, if something happens to you, or somebody says something to you that hurts you so badly? What did they touch in me that made that hurt badly? Because they could probably say that same thing to somebody else and it would just roll right off of them, right?
Right,
So
right.
what in me made me vulnerable to that?
I want to thank Patti Davis for being with us. This is the third book of Patti's that I've read. She's an incredible writer and communicator. And Patti goes the road, which is always precarious and risky, of self-revelation, and through self-revelation, help all of us to better understand why we think and feel as we do, and what's the road to healing, what's the road to being whole, what's the road to finding out what is God's plan or meaning for me in my life. It's a
Mhm.
daring and courageous way to write, Patti, but you do it so well. And it
Oh,
really helps all of us, I think, to read, because it's not just your story. It's a story that touches all of our lives. So thank
yeah.
you for your ability to communicate and your
Oh,
willingness to be open and vulnerable. You're an amazing talent and gifted person. And I hope my listeners and viewers will get hold of Dear Mom and Dad, because it's so worth the read. And Patti, thank you for all you do.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Thank
Yeah,
you.
this was good. As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you need to reach me, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. We're also, you're probably listening to this on Sirius XM, the Catholic channel, but if you want to watch the program, we're on YouTube. You can search under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. Privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.